The Discovery. Marcus Chen had always believed that scavenging through alien wreckage was like gambling with death. Today, as he picked his way through the twisted metal remains of what appeared to be a massive spacecraft buried in the red sand of Kepler 442b, he wondered if his luck had finally run out. The crash site stretched for nearly 2 kilometers across the desert landscape. Whatever had brought this ship down had done so with tremendous force, leaving debris scattered like broken bones across the crimson dunes. Marcus adjusted his environmental suit's cooling system as the twin suns beat down mercilessly on the barren world. He had been exploring the Outer Rim territories for 3 years now, ever since the Earth Colonial Authority had branded him a deserter. The truth was more complicated than that, but Marcus had learned that the truth rarely mattered when you were trying to survive on the frontier worlds. What mattered was finding salvage valuable enough to keep his own ship running and his belly full. The alien vessel's hull gleamed with an iridescent quality that Marcus had never seen before. It seemed to shift colors in the harsh sunlight, cycling through deep purples, electric blues, and molten golds. His scanner indicated the metal contained unknown alloys that would fetch a fortune on the black market. But Marcus had learned to be cautious around alien technology. Too many scavengers had disappeared after handling things they didn't understand. As he worked his way deeper into the wreckage, Marcus noticed something odd about the ship's design. The corridors were massive, easily 20 meters high and just as wide. Whatever species had built this vessel, they were either giants or they had been transporting something enormous. The walls were covered in intricate patterns that seemed almost organic, like the veins of some massive creature. His boots crunched on scattered debris as he made his way toward what appeared to be the ship's central hold. The emergency lighting had long since failed, leaving only the pale glow from his helmet lamps to illuminate the twisted passages. Somewhere in the darkness ahead, his motion detector picked up faint readings. Marcus froze, his hand moving instinctively to the plasma rifle on his back. The readings were inconsistent, almost like a heartbeat that would appear for a few seconds and then fade away. Marcus had encountered enough alien wildlife to know that some species could survive in conditions that would kill humans instantly. He approached slowly, his weapon ready but not yet drawn. Experience had taught him that showing immediate aggression often made dangerous situations worse. The central hold opened up before him like a vast cathedral. The ceiling disappeared into shadows beyond his light's reach, and the floor was covered in what looked like the remains of thousands of crystalline containers. Most had been shattered in the crash, their contents long since evaporated or scattered by the desert winds. But in the center of the chamber, Marcus spotted something that made his breath catch in his throat. A single container remained intact, roughly the size of a small vehicle and glowing with a soft, pulsing light. As Marcus approached, he could see that it wasn't actually a container at all, but rather some kind of organic pod. The surface was smooth and warm to the touch, with veins of bioluminescent material running across its surface in complex patterns. Inside the pod, suspended in what appeared to be a viscous, amber-colored fluid, was an egg. Marcus had seen plenty of alien artifacts in his years as a scavenger, but nothing had prepared him for this. The egg was easily 2 meters tall and covered in scales that shifted color like oil on water. It pulsed with the same rhythm as the readings on his motion detector, and as Marcus watched, he could swear he saw something moving inside. His first instinct was to leave immediately. Unknown alien life forms were exactly the kind of trouble that got scavengers killed or worse. But as he stood there, studying the magnificent specimen before him, Marcus found himself captivated. The craftsmanship of the pod, the obvious care that had gone into preserving whatever was inside that egg, suggested this was something incredibly valuable. More importantly, the bio readings from his scanner indicated that whatever was in that egg was still alive. Marcus had studied xenobiology during his time with the Colonial Authority, before everything had gone wrong. He knew that most alien species required very specific environmental conditions to survive. The fact that this creature had remained viable after what must have been months or even years in the crashed ship suggested either incredible resilience or some kind of advanced life support system. As he circled the pod, looking for some way to access it safely, Marcus noticed that the crash had damaged several key components. Nutrient lines had been severed, and the power coupling that fed the preservation system was barely functioning. Whatever was inside that egg, it wouldn't survive much longer without intervention. Marcus made his decision. Working carefully with his plasma cutter, he began to extract the egg from its failing life support system. The pod's bio-neural interfaces were unlike anything in human technology, but the basic principles of life support were universal. He rigged a temporary power supply from his suit's battery pack and managed to stabilize the most critical systems. The egg was heavier than he had expected, requiring his suit's mechanical assistance just to lift it. As he carried it back through the twisted corridors of the alien ship, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. Several times he stopped to check his motion detector, but the readings showed nothing except the steady pulse from the egg itself. Loading the egg into his ship's cargo bay presented another challenge. Marcus had to rearrange most of his existing salvage and retrofit one of the storage compartments with improvised life support equipment. His ship's AI, a basic model called Area, expressed concern about the power requirements and potential contamination risks. "Marcus, I must advise against bringing unknown biological specimens aboard without proper quarantine protocols," Area said in her usual calm, professional tone. "Noted and ignored," Marcus replied, making final adjustments to the makeshift incubation chamber he had constructed. "This thing is worth more than everything else we've salvaged in the past year combined. Besides, look at these bio readings. Whatever's in here, it's not some mindless predator. The neural development patterns suggest high intelligence, maybe even sentience. That makes it potentially more dangerous, not less," Arya pointed out. Marcus paused in his work, considering her words. She wasn't wrong. Intelligent aliens could be unpredictable in ways that simple beasts couldn't. But something about the egg called to him on a level he couldn't quite explain. Maybe it was his scientific background, or maybe it was just the loneliness of 3 years spent wandering the frontier alone. Either way, he wasn't about to abandon the discovery now. As his ship lifted off from Kepler 442b, leaving the wreckage behind in the desert, Marcus settled in for the long journey to the nearest black market station. He had decided to head for Haven Port, a notorious smuggler's haven in the Centauri disputed zone, where no questions were asked and everything had a price. The journey would take 6 days through hyperspace, plenty of time to study his find and maybe even witness whatever was inside beginning to hatch. Marcus had always prided himself on being practical above all else, but he couldn't deny the excitement building in his chest. This could be his ticket off the frontier, his chance to start over somewhere the colonial authority couldn't find him. What he didn't know, as he watched the strange egg pulse with inner light in his cargo bay, was that the ship he had discovered belonged to the Zephyrian Empire's royal fleet. More specifically, it had been carrying the Queen's personal collection of the most dangerous and valuable creatures in known space. And the egg he had so carefully rescued contained something that even the Zephyrians feared to handle directly: a void dragon, one of only 12 known to exist in the entire galaxy. The ship had been transporting it to a secure facility when it had been attacked by rebels and forced to make an emergency landing on the desert world. Somewhere in the depths of space, Zephyrian search fleets were already converging on the crash site. When they discovered the missing egg, they would stop at nothing to retrieve it. The void dragons were not just rare. They were weapons of unimaginable power, capable of tearing holes in reality itself. Marcus Chen, former colonial authority xenobiologist turned frontier scavenger, had no idea that he had just stolen the most dangerous creature in the galaxy. But as he settled into his pilot's chair and watched the stars streak past in hyperspace, he couldn't shake the feeling that his life was about to change in ways he couldn't possibly imagine. In the cargo bay behind him, the egg's pulsing grew stronger, and something ancient and powerful stirred within its crystalline shell. And the awakening. 3 days into the journey to Haven Port, everything changed. Marcus woke to the sound of alarms blaring throughout his ship. The emergency lighting cast everything in hellish red as he stumbled from his sleeping quarters toward the cargo bay. Aria's voice echoed through the corridors, her usually calm tone strained with urgency. "Marcus, you need to see this immediately. The biological specimen is showing unprecedented activity levels." When Marcus reached the cargo bay, he stopped dead in his tracks. The egg, which had maintained a steady, gentle pulse for the past 72 hours, was now glowing so brightly that he had to adjust his eyes. The makeshift incubation chamber he had built was registering power fluctuations that should have been impossible. "What's happening to it?" he asked, approaching cautiously. "Unknown. The neural activity spiked approximately 15 minutes ago and has been increasing exponentially. More concerning, the egg appears to be affecting our ship's systems. I'm detecting electromagnetic anomalies throughout the vessel." As if to prove Aria's point, the lights flickered, and Marcus felt a strange, tingling sensation in the air around him. It reminded him of the moments before a lightning strike, when every hair on his body would stand on end. The egg's surface began to crack. Marcus watched in fascination and growing terror as thin lines of brilliant light appeared across the scaled shell. The cracks spread slowly but inexorably, following patterns that seemed almost too perfect to be natural. Each new fissure released more of that strange energy, until the entire cargo bay hummed with power. "Should I prepare the emergency protocols?" Aria asked. Marcus considered it for a moment. They were still 3 days from Haven Port, traveling through hyperspace. If whatever was in that egg proved hostile, he would have nowhere to run. But his scientific curiosity outweighed his caution, just as it always had. "Not yet," he said, checking the seals on his environmental suit. "Let's see what we're dealing with first." The egg gave a final, brilliant pulse of light, and then the shell began to fall away in perfectly symmetrical pieces. What emerged from within defied everything Marcus thought he knew about biology and physics. The creature was roughly the size of a house cat, but there the resemblance to anything earthly ended. Its body was sleek and serpentine, covered in scales that seemed to contain tiny galaxies, swirling with miniature stars and nebulae. 4 legs ended in claws that appeared to be made of crystallized darkness, and from its back sprouted wings that looked like they were cut from the fabric of space itself. But it was the creature's eyes that truly took Marcus's breath away. They were enormous relative to its body, and they held an intelligence that was unmistakably ancient and profoundly alien. When those eyes fixed on Marcus, he felt as though he was being examined by something that had existed since the birth of the universe. The dragon, for that was clearly what it was, opened its mouth and made a sound unlike anything Marcus had ever heard. It started as a whisper, like solar wind through cosmic dust, and built to something that resonated in his bones and made his teeth ache. The sound seemed to contain layers of meaning that his human brain couldn't quite grasp. "Fascinating," Aria said. "The acoustic pattern contains mathematical sequences that suggest complex communication. This creature is attempting to establish linguistic contact." Marcus stepped forward slowly, keeping his movements non-threatening. The dragon watched him approach with those cosmic eyes, tilting its head in a gesture that seemed almost curious. When he was within arm's reach, the creature did something that nearly stopped his heart. It spoke, not in words that Marcus could understand, but directly into his mind. Images flooded his consciousness, Vast fleets of crystalline ships moving between stars, worlds of impossible beauty and terrible violence, and above it all, a presence of such magnificent power that it made Marcus's knees buckle. The Queen. The dragon was showing him its queen. More images followed. The transport ship under attack, desperate flight through hostile space, the crash landing on the desert world. But these weren't just memories. They were emotions, too. The dragon had been terrified, alone, abandoned in the wreckage of its world. When the telepathic communication ended, Marcus found himself sitting on the floor of the cargo bay, his head spinning from the mental contact. The dragon was watching him with what he could only interpret as hope. "You're just a baby," he whispered, understanding flooding through him. "You're scared and alone, just like me." Over the next several hours, Marcus found himself forming an impossible bond with the creature. The dragon, which he had started calling Nova because of the way its scales shifted like stellar phenomena, seemed to understand that Marcus had saved it from certain death. In return, it began to show Marcus glimpses of its incredible abilities. Nova could manipulate space-time on a small scale, creating tiny rifts that bent light and gravity. It could phase partially out of normal reality, becoming translucent and able to pass through solid matter. Most remarkably, it could enhance the ship's systems simply by touching them, somehow interfacing directly with the technology. "This is beyond anything in our xenobiological databases," Aria observed, as Nova demonstrated its ability to improve the ship's engine efficiency by 30%. "The creature appears to exist partially outside normal spacetime. I'm detecting quantum signatures that shouldn't be possible for organic matter." Marcus was beginning to understand that he had stumbled onto something far more significant than a simple alien animal. Nova was a member of a species that existed on the very edges of physical reality, being so advanced that their biology incorporated concepts that human science barely understood. But as the days passed and their bond grew stronger, Marcus also began to realize the terrible danger he was in. Nova's telepathic communications became clearer, and the images it shared grew more detailed and more frightening. The ship they had escaped from belonged to an empire that spanned half the galaxy. The queen it served was not just a ruler, but a force of nature, commanding fleets of these void dragons in wars that consumed entire star systems. And Nova was not just any dragon. It was the Queen's personal favorite, her deadliest weapon, bred and trained from birth to be the ultimate instrument of destruction. The ship had been carrying it to a secret facility for advanced combat conditioning when the rebels had struck. "They're coming for you, aren't they?" Marcus asked during one of their mental conversations. Nova's response was a mixture of certainty and sorrow. Yes, they were coming. The Queen would never allow her prize weapon to remain lost. She would tear apart every world in this sector of space if necessary to find it. But Nova showed Marcus something else, something that changed everything. It didn't want to go back. The creature had experienced kindness for the first time in its young life when Marcus had rescued it from the wreckage. It had felt what it was like to be cared for rather than simply used as a weapon. Nova wanted to stay with Marcus, to learn what it meant to be free. The implications were staggering. Marcus had accidentally started what might become an intergalactic war by helping a lost alien hatchling. But as he looked into Nova's cosmic eyes, he found that he didn't care. The creature had trusted him completely, had shared its deepest fears and hopes with a being it barely knew. Marcus made his decision on the 4th day of their journey, as they prepared to drop out of hyperspace near Haven Port. He wasn't going to sell Nova to the highest bidder. He wasn't going to turn the dragon over to human authorities who would just as likely dissect it as study it. He was going to protect it, even if it meant taking on an alien empire. "Aria, change course," he said, settling into the pilot's chair with Nova perched on his shoulder like some impossible star-filled cat. "We're not going to Haven Port." "Where are we going, Marcus?" Marcus smiled grimly as he began plotting a course for the frontier worlds, the lawless region of space where outcasts and rebels carved out their own destinies among the stars. Somewhere they'll never think to look for us. We're going to disappear into the void. Behind them, unknown to Marcus, a massive Zephyrian battle fleet had just entered the system, where Kepler 442b waited in its lonely orbit. When they found the crash site and discovered the missing egg, the Queen's rage would shake the foundations of space itself. The hunt for the stolen Void Dragon was about to begin, and Marcus Chen had just made himself the most wanted man in the galaxy. But as Nova nuzzled against his neck, its purr resonating through dimensions he couldn't name, Marcus found that he wouldn't change a thing. Some discoveries were worth any price, and some bonds were stronger than the threat of armies. The price of freedom. 6 months had passed since Marcus and Nova had disappeared into the frontier worlds, and their lives had settled into a routine that neither of them had expected to survive. They had found refuge on Terminus Station, a massive asteroid fortress that served as a haven for smugglers, pirates, and political refugees from a dozen different civilizations. Nova had grown considerably during their time together, now roughly the size of a large dog, though its alien proportions made direct comparisons difficult. The dragon's abilities had also expanded dramatically. It could now create rifts large enough for their ship to hide in, folding space around them until they existed in a pocket dimension invisible to most sensors. Marcus had used this time to study everything he could about the Zephyrian Empire and the Void Dragons. What he had learned painted a picture of a conflict that spanned millennia, with the dragons serving as the Empire's ultimate weapons in wars against forces that humanity had never even imagined. But today, their peaceful existence was about to come to an end. "Marcus," Arya said, her voice tight with concern, "I'm detecting massive spatial distortions throughout the system. Something very large just dropped out of hyperspace." Marcus was in the station's central plaza, sharing a meal with Nova and watching the bizarre mix of aliens, humans, and artificial beings that called Terminus home. The dragon was perched on his shoulder, its cosmic eyes tracking the movements of a group of crystalline beings from the Helix Nebula. "How large?" Marcus asked, already knowing the answer wouldn't be good. "Ship classification, unknown. Mass equivalent to approximately 50,000 standard vessels." "Marcus, I believe we've been found." The plaza around them erupted into chaos as every communication device, scanner, and sensor array on the station began screaming warnings. Marcus looked up through the transparent aluminum dome overhead and felt his blood turn to ice. Hanging in space above them was a ship that defied comprehension. It was less a vessel than a mobile world, a crystalline construct that seemed to have been grown rather than built. Spires and towers stretched across its surface like the architecture of gods, and the entire structure pulsed with the same cosmic energy that flowed through Nova's scales. The Queen had come personally. Nova's reaction was immediate and terrifying. The young dragon's mental shields, which had grown strong during their months together, suddenly slammed down like blast doors. Marcus felt the creature's terror through their bond, a fear so pure and primal that it made him stumble. "She's here," Nova whispered directly into his mind, the first words it had ever spoken in human language. "The Queen Mother. She's come for me." Around the plaza, panic was spreading as people realized that something beyond their understanding had arrived. The station's automated defenses, weapon systems that could vaporize entire fleets, hadn't even activated. Whatever was above them was so far beyond their ability to threaten that the AI systems couldn't classify it as anything other than a natural phenomenon. Marcus grabbed Nova and ran for their ship, pushing through crowds of fleeing beings as alarms wailed throughout the station. Behind them, reality began to warp and twist as the Queen's presence made itself known. Gravity fluctuated wildly, time moved in stutters and jolts, and the very air seemed to sparkle with dangerous energy. They reached their ship just as the first of the Queen's servants materialized throughout the station. Marcus had seen images of adult void dragons in the databases he had accessed, but nothing had prepared him for the reality. They were magnificent and terrible, creatures of living starlight that moved through space as easily as through atmosphere. Each one was the size of a building, with powers that could reshape matter at the molecular level. "Arya, get us out of here!" Marcus shouted as he and Nova dove into the ship. "Working on it, but the space around us is becoming increasingly unstable. The massive vessel is affecting local space-time to such a degree that hyperspace entry may be impossible." Through their ship's viewports, Marcus watched as the Queen's dragons spread throughout the station like a living aurora. They weren't attacking, they were searching. Each dragon moved with perfect precision, examining every corridor and compartment with senses that could peer through solid matter and into parallel dimensions. "Nova, can you hide us like before?" Marcus asked desperately. The young dragon was trembling against his chest, its usual confidence completely shattered by the presence of its former mistress. "She'll find me," it whispered. "She always finds what belongs to her. I was made to come when she calls." As if summoned by Nova's words, a presence filled their ship, not physical, but mental and spiritual. A consciousness so vast and ancient that it made Marcus feel like an insect contemplating the ocean. The Queen had found them. Images flooded Marcus's mind, but these weren't the gentle communications he had grown used to with Nova. This was an invasion, a forced examination that laid bare every thought and memory he possessed. The Queen sifted through his life with clinical detachment, studying his motivations and measuring his worth. When she withdrew from his mind, Marcus collapsed to his knees, blood streaming from his nose. Nova was beside him instantly, its small form radiating protective energy that somehow eased the pain in his skull. "Interesting," a voice said, and Marcus looked up to see that they were no longer alone on their ship. The Queen was beautiful in the way that supernovas were beautiful. Terrible and magnificent, and completely beyond human comprehension. She appeared human at first glance, but the illusion shattered when Marcus tried to look directly at her. Her form shifted constantly, sometimes appearing as an elegant woman in flowing robes, sometimes as pure energy barely contained in a humanoid shape. "You are the one who stole my dragon," she said, her voice carrying harmonics that made the ship's hull vibrate. "I saved it," Marcus replied, forcing himself to stand despite the cosmic pressure of her presence. "It was dying in that wreck." The Queen tilted her head, and Marcus caught a glimpse of eyes that held the birth and death of galaxies. "Saved it? How amusing. Do you know what this creature is, little human? Do you understand what you have been playing with? I know it's intelligent. I know it can choose its own path, and I know it doesn't want to go back to being your weapon." The Queen's laughter was like the sound of breaking reality. "Choice? You speak of choice as if it matters. This dragon was bred for a specific purpose, genetically programmed to serve the Empire. It is no more capable of true choice than your ship's computer." "That's where you're wrong," Marcus said, his fear transforming into anger. "Nova chose to trust me. It chose to share its thoughts and feelings with someone who cared about its well-being instead of just its usefulness. It chose to be free." Something flickered across the Queen's impossible features, an emotion that might have been surprise or curiosity. She looked down at Nova, who was pressed against Marcus's legs but no longer trembling. "Is this true, little one?" she asked, her voice softening to something that might have been motherly if it weren't so alien. "Have you learned to choose?" Nova raised its head and looked directly at its former mistress, something that would have been unthinkable months ago. When it spoke, its voice carried new strength and certainty. "I choose to stay with Marcus," it said simply. He taught me that I could be more than a weapon. He showed me what it means to be cared for instead of just used. I choose freedom. The silence that followed stretched for what felt like hours. The Queen stared at her former prize weapon while cosmic forces swirled around them, reality bending and flexing under the pressure of her consideration. Finally, she spoke. "You have done something unprecedented, human. You have taken a creature designed for absolute obedience and somehow taught it to rebel. In 10,000 years of conquest, I have never seen anything like this." Marcus tensed, expecting the final blow. Instead, the Queen did something completely unexpected. She smiled. "Freedom is a concept my people abandoned long ago in pursuit of perfect order. Perhaps we lost something valuable in that choice." She looked at Nova again, and her expression held something that might have been pride. "You have become something new, little one, something I could never have created through design and conditioning." She turned back to Marcus, and for a moment her form stabilized into something more human. "I could take the dragon back by force. Your resistance would last mere seconds against my power." "I know," Marcus said, "but it wouldn't be the same creature anymore. Force it back into slavery, and you'll destroy everything that makes Nova special." The Queen nodded slowly. "Wisdom from an unexpected source. Very well, human. Keep my dragon. But know that this decision comes with consequences. The Empire will never accept that one of our weapons has chosen independence. They will see this as a weakness that must be corrected." "Then they'll have to go through me," Marcus said, surprised by his own conviction. "Indeed they will, and that should prove quite entertaining." The Queen began to fade, her form becoming translucent as she prepared to return to her ship. "I will delay the search for my lost weapon, claim that it died in the crash. This will buy you time, but not much. Others will come, and they will not be as understanding as I." "Why?" Marcus asked. "Why let us go?" The Queen paused in her departure, considering the question. "Because in all my millennia of existence I have created nothing that truly surprised me. Today you and this small dragon have shown me something genuinely new, that is worth preserving even if it means losing my finest weapon." She looked at Nova one last time. "Be free, little one. Be everything you choose to be." And then she was gone, leaving only the faint echo of cosmic winds and the scent of ozone. Marcus and Nova stood alone on their ship, watching through the viewports as the Queen's massive vessel began to fade from normal space-time. The other dragons withdrew like a retreating tide, leaving Terminus Station shaken but intact. "What happens now?" Marcus asked, settling into his pilot's chair with Nova curled up beside him. The dragon's response came as a mixture of telepathic images and spoken words, a communication style that had become their own private language. "Now we explore," Nova said, its cosmic eyes bright with possibility. "The galaxy is vast, and there are wonders neither of our species has ever seen. Together we can discover them all." Marcus smiled and began plotting a course for the unexplored regions beyond the galactic rim. Behind them, the frontier worlds continued their chaotic dance, but ahead lay infinite possibility. The Queen had been right about one thing. Others would come hunting for the escaped void dragon. The Zephyrian Empire would never truly accept that their ultimate weapon had chosen freedom over service. But Marcus and Nova would face those challenges together. Human ingenuity and determination combined with cosmic power beyond imagination. As their ship accelerated toward unknown stars, Marcus reflected on the strange journey that had brought them together. A simple salvage operation had become the discovery of a lifetime, and the discovery had become something even more precious, a friendship that transcended species, time, and space itself. In the end, that was the true victory. Not the escape from the Queen or the survival of their bond, but the proof that choice and compassion could triumph over even the most absolute power. Nova had chosen to be free, and Marcus had chosen to help, and together they had shown the galaxy something new. Freedom, it turned out, was worth any price, and some bonds were stronger than empires.